Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael, recording for Preservative Talk Radio. Preservative Talk Radio, engaging the issues of the day from a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, a basis of right versus wrong. That's essentially what I do. Today, we're talking about ambition. I was contemplating the last couple of days about the obstacles to liberty, to happiness that are coming from coercion from government, where of course we know, we understand, we love their government. You know why? It's there to, let's say, secure our liberty, to secure our happiness and safety. And so that if government is going right, all things are going right. That those who are a little bit miscreant and are missing the mark on their conduct and it's affecting people negatively, there's a system, a protocol, a procedure, a power that can give, let's just say, motivate people to stop doing wrong things. And for doing right things, there's a certain, by just nature, it encourages people to do the right thing. So today I was thinking about, am I too litigious? Am I too much looking at government in sort of a critical mode, and that maybe I'm being overly critical? Maybe I need to stop being so critical and stop like going toe to toe with bureaucracies and bureaucrats who are not, okay, they're not, let's admit it, they're not actually fulfilling the mission of the bureaucracy or the mission of the government structure. Let's admit it, it's happening. But should I be the one that's going toe to toe with them? Well, actually, yes. So today, that's what we're talking about. We're going to talk about ambition, competing against ambition, and what's healthy and what's not. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to be using my favorite of all the Federalist Papers, Federalist 51, written by James Madison. And I love some of the things. So I'm actually going to start at the back of Federalist 51. We're going to go to the bottom. We're going to go to the salient points that Madison made in the closing of his publication of Federalist 51. And it's going to be a focus, kind of a reorientation of what government is supposed to be and what the benefit it has to us, you and me, and whether or not ought we, me and you, or you and me, should we be in a posture of ambition competing against ambition? That's the question of the day. And of course, this is always, again, a biblical basis. So we're going to have to keep in, let's say, the caveat or to have us oriented properly in a healthy way. We're going to have to base our motives not on the Constitution or the civil laws of men or the common law or anything that's a structure of mankind or even nature, which is creation. We need to keep our reference to that which the Creator has revealed to us, that we can't even, it's better Him, the Creator, revealing things for us to do, telling us how to think, is much better than us even connecting dots, observing nature. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm going to go right to, the my my discussion of what James Madison said, and I'm actually going to be reading from Federalist 51 because it's a healthy thing to do. It's a healthy document. So, and just for those who had not really understood what Federalist 51 is, or what the Federalist Papers are, when it came time uh, to actually approve the Constitution, there were certain states, in particular New York, wasn't too completely happy about the idea. Virginia wasn't completely happy about the idea. They were very, let's just say they were forerunners in the philosophy of liberty and freedom. And things were kind of structured fairly well in Virginia as far as they were concerned. And they didn't necessarily want to give up too much power to a more central power without some serious qualification. So Madison was one of the three people, as well as Hamilton And then John Jay, these three guys got together and they just started cranking out newspaper articles. And it was being published in New York and it was being distributed throughout the colonies. And so what they did is they basically explained these in over 80 publications what the details were, why they wrote what they wrote in the Constitution that they were considering to have the people for the people's consideration and to ratify the Constitution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to right now Madison's his statement, Federalist 51, and you're going to hear some terms, and some of these terms, if you read what these guys were reading, you'd kind of say, well, I know where he got this prescription. But for us, that we generally don't read the stuff that the founders were reading, except for the Bible once in a while. We don't realize that this somebody else had thought these thoughts and they were just kind of connecting the dots. So here's the dots that are connected. I want you to consider it and I want you to review it. And in the context of ambition, competing against ambition, what role, how many calories should you be burning competing against somebody's ambition? And this is what Madison said. Justice is the end of government. In our language today it's the purpose of government. It's what it's trying to achieve is justice. It is the end of civil society. So it's saying civil society, actually people getting together in a societal form deliberately is their purpose. The end result they want is justice. James Madison goes on, it ever has been and ever will be pursued, that's justice, until it be attained or until liberty be lost in the pursuit. Now, these are big philosophical statements. But why do we have a society? God's command, love your neighbor, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws are fulfilled. You don't need any other law. Just obey God and and love your neighbor. And it'll all work out. But there's more to it. There's how do you love your neighbor? What kind of structure? How do you pull it off? Do you just feel warm and fuzzy about him? Or do you demonstrate it somehow? And I believe that what it is, nature has caught the creation, the very creation that God has made, he's put in our hearts a desire to have society in the family, society with your neighbor, and a general, let's say we experience benefit when we're loving our neighbor. You go to I was thinking of Buc-ee's. Okay, it's kind of far away, but I think 153 miles or something like that. But let's say you go to a big store, a mini mart or anything. You're in a grocery store, and going in and out. And for the most part, people are crazy courteous to one another. You know what? In fact, you die to your ambition. You allow the other person to get the cart before you do. In our American society, that has for great foundation of American society is the Word of God and loving your neighbor as ourselves. So it's been imbibed, it's been programmed into our heads culturally, and I think in nature we understand that there's a benefit that we receive to being gracious to people. So we are for the most part gracious. In fact, the best ambition that we can have is that ambition to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. If that's your ambition, everybody benefits. If we're all dueling ambition, if all of our ambition is competing in loving one another, what a good place this would be. So now we're going to keep in mind here that there's an ambition of people whose hearts are corrupt. If you're on the street and somebody wants to rob you, wants to take your stuff, or wants to take out their anger on you, they've got an ambition against you. They've got a personal ambition that's corrupt, and it's going to and ultimately going to lead to their demise. What do? Your ambition at that point is safety. And so you're concerned for safety of yourself and your family and your neighbor overrides your ambition to love somebody. Now, I've been in positions where I've had to think and I have to pray and say, God, my ambition is to share your love with these hoodlums. These are gangsters over there. There's 15 of them. One of them has already assaulted me. So, do I fulfill my ambition to share the love of God here? Because I might get beat up. Well, at the time, I prayed about it and I went and put myself in a position of danger, and it worked out really beautifully. I won 14 people. One of them, the one who had assaulted me, had left. Right. So, so my ambition for this crowd, because of my, let's say, what I do with how much of the Bible I'm fulfilling every day, is I had this ambition to override safety. But for you, when there's a brute, a thug who's coming against you, who's assaulting you, you have a ambition of safety. So we have created a government, and we're going to be talking about this. We're going to read things right out of the Federalist 51 that's going to back up exactly what I've said. But we have created a government that is a thug. We have, even just like the Declaration of Independence, complained about all these executive officers that have come and it's stealing our money and oppressing us. Well, that's what they complained about, and they declared independence. But we as a people have not been using due diligence to exercise ambition for our safety, to keep a thuggery from being created. And that's what I want you to be considering today. So let's go back to Federalist 51. We're going to set the pace, the perspective on what it is that we're supposed to be thinking. What should our ambition be, and why should it be? So James Madison continued, in a society under the forms of which the stronger faction may be thuggish, which the stronger faction can readily unite and oppress the weaker faction, anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger. So, why is there a Second Amendment? Because ultimately the state of nature is fallen. We remember that Cain killed his brother Abel because of Cain's ambition, the jealous ambition. He murdered his brother. So there are people out there who are willing to commit murder. That's why the Second Amendment protects a right, doesn't provide a right, doesn't give a right, doesn't give a privilege. It just notices the fact that you have an absolute, inherent, untakeable right in nature to protect yourself, to protect your life, even if what you're protecting yourself from happens to be a standing army. Also, if it's not a horde of a standing army, it happens to be one corrupt person who's going to use whatever tools available to them to injure you, to hurt you, to take your life, to maim you, to take your property, whatever the motivation is. So in a society under the form of which the stronger faction can readily unite and oppress the weaker, you know what? It can't happen if the weaker are all armed. It's much harder for a faction to become so strong without its own demise, to take on the weaker if the weaker is fully equipped to neutralize the threat. That's the Second Amendment. James Madison says, anarchy may be truly said to reign in a state of nature, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger. So we have to have, this is under the principle of what is the ambition? What is in the ambition that we ought to have and competing against another ambition? What is an ambition that's there to compete against us? And how much of our energy are we supposed to be extending or expending personally and as a society to stand up to those things that might be a threat to us or a threat to those who are weaker in our society? Again, on a biblical basis. Jesus said in Matthew 25, as you do unto the least of these, the weaker faction, you're doing it unto me. He's got your back, and I think he's concerned about our conduct toward one another. Stay tuned, Nuga Radio and this Preservative Talk Radio. We'll be right back. So I've got a minute to come back to this. Yes, I do. So that's it. Please like, share, subscribe if you're tuning in live or coming back later. Share it with your friends. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments. And I would love to get back to you on those things. And people that have contacted me, they've found ways to contact me. So I'm not going to put it out in mass here. I'll let people burn some calories to try to get to me as they may. That's what we're going to do. So how much time do I have here? All right. I forgot to shave. Here we go. Here we go. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael. Ambition competing against ambition. It turns out we're supposed to have ambition. If we don't have ambition, we'll have a tendency to just kind of roll over and go to sleep, and our poverty will just overwhelm us and overtake us. And that's not what we want. We want to be, let's say, having the ambition and expending energy for our benefit, that of our family and our neighbors. And what I'm doing today is I'm reviewing Federalist 51, my favorite of all the Federalist papers, Federalist 51, written by James Madison, where he talks about the principle of the what they call the Republican government. And I've talked about this being a mixed government. That's the tools that are being used to make sure that our government is secure and sound and is effective in doing what it ought to do. So I'm going to be continuing to read from James Madison's Federalist 51. And as I said just a little bit before, that we don't want to be in a situation where a strong faction is able to overwhelm a weak faction. But as we're observing, you can see it on the news. It's crazy, the maniac stuff that's going on. I mean, when you've got uh, crimes being charged against people, and now it's against famous rich people. Usually, there's crimes being necessarily charged against people that may or may not be guilty, but it doesn't matter these days. We've got a system where people who do wrongs get prosecuted, in some cases persecuted, but there's also people who don't do wrongs, but who are needing to be targeted by certain factions, and the so-called Justice Department could be used as a weapon unjustly. And the machinery is set up in such a way that essentially, if you get accused, you really have a very limited chance of being acquitted, even if innocent. And those are the kind of things we're facing right now. So that's what motivated me today to talk about ambition and to be thinking about what ambition are we going to use against others' ambition. As a subtitle, I'd say it's a Patriot prescription. This is the Patriots, that's the founding fathers' prescription for your life, liberty, and happiness and safety. So James Madison went on to say, he said, as in a state of nature, even the stronger individuals are prompted by the uncertainty of their condition to submit to a government which may protect the weak as well as themselves. Now, one thing about being a big bully, and if you, let's say, you have the ability to coerce or persuade because you're just so big that it's like inertia. You know, an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and the bigger the object, the harder it is to slow down. So, the only problem is eventually for people's own ambition for their life, liberty, and safety, they may gather and recruit a bigger faction that's going to put at jeopardy what was once the biggest faction. So, as he says, even the stronger individuals are prompted by the uncertainty of their condition to submit to a government which may protect the weak as well as themselves. So, in a state of nature, will the more powerful factions or parties be gradually induced by a like motive for wish for a government which will protect all parties, the weaker as well as the more powerful. Now, a lot of people are concerned where they say, where a person, an individual man or woman, has these protections in law that even though their belief system or their practice, their activities, their whatever it is they're doing is so far from the norm, it is so exactly individual, not not meaning any faction whatsoever. Some people will say, well, wait a minute, we can't just like have everybody bend over backwards for these people. No, actually, what you should do is leave them alone. If they're if their little minuscule faction of themselves, or the three of them, or the 10 of them, or the 50 of them, don't conform with your societal plan, let them go. As long as they're not hurting anybody, let them go. So, even because eventually is when there's so many little people that all of them with their own individual interest find themselves being interfered with by a bigger faction, a big bureaucracy, a big corporation, or something like that. And if they start gathering together as a great number of individuals, the corporation or bureaucracy, suddenly their rights are in danger. So that's the principle. It's just basically Madison's explaining to people to why the federal structure of government, of Republican government, needed to be ratified. It's because observing nature, these are the kind of things that happen. So he says that even the more powerful will wish for a government which will protect all parties, the weaker as well as the more powerful. So that's a principle of James Madison in his in what he was thinking about when he wrote the Federalist Papers and Federalist 51. And that's the reason it's one of my favorite of all the Federalist Papers is because its principle, it's acknowledging the state of nature of mankind. It's and it's giving a practical application. You know, you're not just creating a government so you get just everybody has a bulldozer that they can stimulate its economy by paying taxes just for taxes' sake. That's not why a government is instituted. It's instituted, of course, to protect life, liberty, and property. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of go back to uh, the beginning of the Federalist paper, Federalist 51, where here's statements made by Madison. He says, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So the city has a desire, a planning, a zoning plan. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. You can keep your stupid, pardon my language. You can keep your silly zoning plan. I bought this property 30 years ago, and I have a plan that is none of your business. I don't care what you'd like to have happen over 50 people's property. That's wonderful little utopia in your mind. Write a book about it. That's going to be beautiful. You can make a cartoon. Have a little fictional characters and have a good time. Leave my property alone. On the other hand, what if you have somebody who wants to come in and do a new plan, and you've got a beautiful cul-de-sac that's perfectly tailored, and y'all are having who can have the best looking lawn, and you put a little sign in the best looking lawn every month to give them an award, to motivate this competition. And somebody comes in there and wants to make in that cul-de-sac a a place where people can tow in their cars and have them stripped for parts, a junkyard. Um, I think there's an ambition competing against ambition. Now, of course, you say, well, okay, that justifies zoning. No, it doesn't. What it does is it gives an ambition for neighbors to communicate to one another, to be motivated by themselves to love one another and not inconvenience one another, right? So, but to have opportunities though for people to get property where they can do something that's a little bit squirrely without having this world crossing borders. Let me interfere with your little society's modes and mores of how you're going to use your property. So there's ambitions that are global right now that have nothing to do with your interest. Nothing to do with your interest. And there's got to be, and there is ambition competing against ambition. And here at Preservative Talk Radio and Nuga Radio Network, our goal is to equip you. And this today's program is very conceptual. There's some programs where I've give you absolute, well, here's the step of procedure that I followed when I needed to break the corporate veil. I went boom, 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 like this, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, success. We're going to have shows like that. This one is oriented particularly for motivation, to put your mind in gear. And then I think if your mind gets in gear on these issues, you're going to see things happen around them, and you're going to be filtering it through what you've heard today. Those things that you see, you're going to filter through what you're learning today. So ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the Constitution rights of the place. And of course, in this case, Madison was talking about why you'd have a judiciary that's appointed and not elected, why you have an executive and how they gain their powers and how their powers are selected, and why you'd have a legislature that's divided, a Senate and the House of Representatives, and the separate roles, and why you'd have states, a combination government where you've got what some would call central or a federal government for the competing interests of all the several states, and then balance with each individual state having its own interests and its own powers that compete against everybody else's. Right now in the news, we're seeing this trial in Georgia about the election thing. And of course, it's just divided factions all over. But one thing, being neutral on the subject, is that you're seeing in operation the ambition of the states of Georgia competing against the ambition of somebody in the United States. So in the Constitution, it talked about the people, the states, and the United States. And so there's these ambitions competing against ambitions. You have the people and the United States. So President Trump was the executive of the United States, an entity of the three parties to the Constitution. The people competing with ambition against and for the United States, and the United States competing against and for the states, and the states competing against the United States, and sadly sometimes the people. For it's supposed to be competing against the United States. Georgia competing against the United States and its officers for the sake of the people of Georgia. So those are all the ambitions. We're seeing it happen. And of course, because nobody's having this discussion about the legitimate interest of either of the parties, what we're seeing is just crazy factional warfare, just choosing sides. And if you're not on one person's side, you're being rejected. Now, I think our ambition needs to shift. We need to stop and think. This is what got me into this radio show today. Is to, even for myself, who's somewhat litigious, in that I litigate or at least threaten litigation to get things done when there's a bureaucracy who's standing up against the little guy. So I've been successful at it. So I think when you get successful at it, sometimes it ends up being your default activity. But I realized that I need to step back a little bit and start considering the legitimate ambition of the bureaucracy that's obstructing me. How do I get the illegitimate aspects of the bureaucracy to back down while endorsing and encouraging and equipping the bureaucracy to fulfill those goals it has, the ambition that's healthy? So that's what motivated me to just pull up this ambition subject today, is to kind of tell myself not to start heading the other direction and not to back up, but maybe stand up, take a wider view of the scenario and the situation. Even as we see the silly stuff in the news in Georgia and the indictments against 19 officers and lawyers, and you can see that there's at least a color of legitimate ambition from the state, and it may be that there's some warped, corrupt ambitions that are modulating that important uh, interest that might be legitimate. So in all these things, let's step back out of the faction, take a deep breath, consider the fact that the other guy's got a legitimate reason for having an ambition that competes with yours. And let's try to use this ambition to love one another. David Allen Carmichael, Conservative Talk Radio, Noogle Radio Network. 2 more minutes. Like, subscribe, share. That's what I'd like you to do. And I'm competing right now. I know that the president is in Iowa. Not president. The guy who wants to run for president and doesn't want to go to jail, whatever his name is, right? He's in Iowa right now, Friday night, in a live rally. And so, yeah, but ambition competing against ambition. I'm the smaller, weaker faction. And I have ambitions for the sake of my neighbor. They're different ambitions than, of course, those who are seeking public office. So both of us are servants of the Most High God in the public sphere. Some of us doing it on platforms, and some of us sort of in a proverbial closet. So I got to take a break as we have incoming sound here. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael. What is your ambition? Oh, I just want to stay home. I want to sleep. I want to just hold my hands and go to sleep. Haven't I earned it? You know, I brought that up to probably, it might have been 20 years ago. This is sick. That's 20 years ago. I told a man, he happened to be a lawyer, and he happened to be over 20 years older than me. He could be my father. And I said, Herb, I'm just tired. I'm tired of, and he rebuked me, yelled at me. Herb Titus yelled at me. It was on the phone, so it didn't hurt my ears. And he yelled at me, and he says, he just rebuked me. He said, you know, he basically, with so many nice words, told me to shut up. Quit your whining. Get up. You don't have, in nature, we don't have a right to just roll over. You got to get up until you can't get up anymore. And then the hyenas come and get you. In the meantime, we're going to be battling hyenas. So there's a natural, let's say, because the world is fallen, because the nature of sin in man, we have corrupt ambitions. So our righteous ambitions have to overwhelm and overcome those whose ambitions were corrupt. So I'm going to now go to James Madison's Federalist 51, quote some of the reflections that he had, that he shared with the people of New York in talking about why they should ratify the Constitution that we know. He said, it may be a reflection on human nature that such devices, that's ambition competing against ambition with a government structure, should be necessary to control the abuses of government, right? So separate branches, all these things that are essentially, they call it checks and balances, whatever. Again, Madison used the term ambition competing against ambition. It may be a reflection of human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself? But the greatest of all reflections on human nature. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. And I disagree with his statement here, and I'm going to qualify it, and hopefully I'm more correct than James Madison here. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, The great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed. Hear that? The government first, he put as a priority, the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. I'm of the opposite. I think the priorities are shifted. And I think this compatriots in setting up the government, the Constitution, at least those people from Virginia that wanted a Bill of Rights, they thought it was in a first place that it ought to have the government oblige itself to control itself. Because you got to realize who is running the government? Men. Who Madison called the governed. Those who are governed under our structure of the Constitution is men. But they're men, not the people. And men, mankind, man or woman, whoever's in the office, that the structure is to police the police. That is the first priority. And what I've observed, and which is I can deduce by the things I observe, is that you're seeing a lot of people put the police on report, on video these days. Now they're not capturing the guys that are doing great. But once in a while you get a renegade and you realize, oh my goodness, this guy's job isn't to beat me up, to pull me out of my car, to thump me over the head, to use pepper spray because I'm in a verbal dispute, right? Make me pay because I had a different opinion. That is not their purpose. Their purpose is to protect my right to not be pepper sprayed. That's their job. So that should be their ambition. So there's been some corruption that we forget the purpose. The purpose of government is to protect the rights of the weakest individual from the insults and injuries of the stronger. That's what the founders read. That's when they were reading Blackstone 10 years before they wrote the Declaration of Independence. That's what they learned and understood, that coercive power of government isn't to, as Madison said here, enable the government to control the governed. It is to enable the government to protect the rights of its weakest member. The stronger government gets, the rights and laws inherently are there to protect the people from the government itself. And those are the kind of things that we're observing. So what kind of ambition should I have in the current environment? Biblically, submit to the authority over you. Romans chapter 13. That's true. Again, I like to go to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, where it says, submit to the institution. Uphold the institution. So under those two principles of the Bible, I'm not supposed to be necessarily succumbing to orders of a policeman. I am supposed to succumb to the orders of the policeman that are done pursuant to that authority structure. As soon as the policeman gives me an authorized order, I smile and I say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm worshiping God as I obey your order. But when an order comes that is contrary to the authority, then I have an ambition for my own health and safety, for the health and safety of my children, and for the protection, their long-term protection in this society, to stand and say, I oppose you in your conduct that violates the authority. So in my life, I've done that a few times. I've done that in the Navy. When given an order, give you an example. What was it? I can't think of it. Oh man, it's sort of like the military's version of the United Way, Combined Federal Campaign. So somebody said, hey, Carmichael, you're going to be the Combined Federal Campaign Coordinator. Gotcha. Yes, sir. He's got the authority. They want to volunteer, but he just told me to do it. I said, yes, sir. So I went and checked to the executive officer, had a meeting with him. He told, he gave me the authority structure. I asked him questions. I looked at the at what point is do I coerce people or do I invite them to volunteer? What is the protocol here? Well, it turns out it's completely voluntary. In fact, it's prohibited to coerce people. And the only person who's authorized to see who's given, the only person that I can disclose the information that I gather when somebody fills out a form that says, please take money out of my paycheck to give it to this particular charity. The only person that I can disclose that information to is the executive officer. That is the authority. So I have an ambition to submit to the orders of the President of the United States, the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulation and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's my ambition. So I know the rules. The rules are I disclose it to the XO and I don't coerce people. So when they had a little thing, a senior chief in the office, well, we want to get 100%, so we're going to put up a chart there. Well, that's your prerogative. You can do that. Carmichael, what percentage are we at? 80? All right. I want you to tell me those who have not given. All right. And my answer was no. And then all the senior chiefs, there's at least 3 or 4 of them. And I think at the time I was a first class petty officer. So, 2 ranks above me. It's like double power. It's exponent kind of thing. I said, and they all went, no. I said, excuse me. No, sir. What? Let's go talk, right? And so all of a sudden they're getting their finger in my face, telling me I better get my act together. They're writing my evals and stuff. I said, no, sir. I am subject to the authority over me. And the authority over me says that I disclose this information to nobody but the executive officer. If you like the information, you're going to have to see if he's got the discretion to give it to you, that information. But you're not getting it from me. I have no discretion. I'm subjecting myself. It's not withstanding your threats. I have the ambition to do the right thing here, sir, senior chief. That's just reality. So, and that's an example. So that's kind of like if a police officer, somebody in the bureaucracy, comes up and demands something that is contrary to liberty, the ordered structure, contrary to the protocol, the established order, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you're going to call it, according to Scripture, I have to stand up for the authority, submit to the authority, not the authoritarian. So ambition competing against ambition. I'm going to read some more. Madison, in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this, that you must first enable the government to control the governed, and the next place oblige it to control itself. I think that's flipped. So he goes on and he starts talking about Republican government, and he says the legislative authority predominates. And then he says the remedy for this inconveniency is divide the legislature into 2 different branches to render them by different modes of election and different principles of action as little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions, their common dependence on society will admit. Okay, so he's basically saying there's a reason why we're separating this into branches. One more statement by Madison here. In the compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between 2 distinct governments. So who are the parties to the Constitution? We the people, the United States, and the states. 3 parties to the Constitution. It's divided between 2 distinct governments. So the people divided between the United States and the states. And then the portion allotted to each is subdivided among distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. So, another statement by Madison here. It is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustice of the other part. Different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizens. If a majority be united by a common interest, the rights of the minority will be insecure. In a free government, the security for civil rights must be the same as that for religious rights. It consists in the one case in the multiplicity of interest, and in the other in the multiplicity of sects. So sect, S-E-C-T-S-S. S-E-C-T-S. So what I've done for you here is I've kind of prattled off a bunch of you probably never read the Federalist Papers, and I highly recommend that you do. But nonetheless, this I've read off this information because I think it's important for us to stop and think about nature and what is my role. What is my role with regard to my neighbor who has a different interest in religion? He has a different interest in what his property should look like. My neighbor has an interest in mowing his lawn. The one on my right it's like a golf course. He mows that thing down to a nub. Where the guy on the other side, he mows it high and he lets it grow a long time. So we're kind of we have to like do the blend in our yard. But I have to be gracious and in my mind think about the fact that my neighbor who wants to grind it down to a nub, well, bless his heart, he's enjoying it. He takes pleasure. He mows his lawn a lot more than once a week. The guy on my left, you know what he wants to do? Not spend all his time on a lawnmower. I gotta respect that. I gotta honor that. Somewhere in between, we're gonna have this taper that looks good. Ambition competing against ambition, modified by the ambition to love your neighbor as yourself. So take a deep breath and start considering what it is that you need to do to make sure that your ambition is productive for yourself and your neighbor. Thank you for watching and share it with your friends. Send me a message, give me some input. Tune into Nuga Radio. This is going to broadcast probably Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and it may be repeated sometime on Wednesday, either at 11 o'clock or maybe at 10 o'clock again. I'm not really sure. And sometimes during the week at night, you might hear it on Nuga Radio. You can listen online, stream at nugaradio.com. There's a listen link there. Also, Rumble user Nuga Radio, and you can tune into what's happening right in the studio 24 hours a day. And that's it. So we're going to see you again sometime for this Preservative Talk Radio.